We finally made it to the autumn season. I don't think I've ever looked forward to fall this much before in my life. Well, I've had a very long summer. Like, it was just so brutal, like in the 100-degree weathers for several days in a row. And funny enough, fall didn't actually used to be my favorite season. It was actually my least favorite season. And that was mostly because of where I used to live. I used to live in much colder climates, such as Alaska. And our fall was just like only 4 weeks long. And it was really short, but that meant that winter was coming. And and our winters was like 9 months long. It was just so long. Versus where I live now, which is in the southern states, it's the opposite. We have extremely long summers. And summer used to be my favorite season just because I couldn't get enough of it when I was younger. But now I get so much of it, but it was so much that I couldn't even enjoy it. That's what bummed me out. I couldn't go outside as much in that 100-degree weather like I wanted to, and I really enjoy the outdoors. But anyways, I just figured this fall season I could look for ways to enjoy it more, such as like creating this maple leaf necklace. And so what I'm currently using is a 1/0 saw blade. What that means is a number 1 is like one of the larger saw blades, and that's just only because that's the only size I had. There are other sizes such as like 4 and 8, which are like the smaller sizes. I much prefer a 4, but that's all I have were the number 1 sizes. So it does catch as I'm trying to like cut the design out. So what I did was, to help it glide a little smoother, was I used 3-in-1 oil to keep it gliding through instead of my normal dry lubricant, which is called Burlife. It just wasn't working as well. So I'm really glad that I decided to use that instead. I don't normally do that, but that worked really well this time. But so what I'm using now is my needle file, and this particular needle file is called a barrette needle file. So it's got a safe edge on top and it's got the grit underneath. So right now I'm just smoothing out the pointy little edges of the leaf so that they're not super sharp when it is worn. I do plan to curl them up later as I start finishing the piece up a bit. So I just do all these little like types of details where it's still smooth all the places where it needs to, and that way it will feel nice when it is worn. So what I'm using now is a Kraus burr, and this is a really small, like pointed sharp tool. It's like a small little cutter, and I'm just going inside the grooves a bit and to redefine all those tiny little edges and concave areas of the leaf so that it can just look more natural, but look more like a maple leaf instead of like a cartoonish type of leaf. But I want it to look as realistic as I could and still give it some sharpness, but without it actually being sharp, if that makes sense. And here I am just trying to fit the bail and make sure it will fit the leaf before I start soldering it together. So I'm currently prepping the piece for soldering. I just apply denature alcohol and boric acid, which is a mixture, and that protects the piece from oxidizing, means it's just turning black, and that will be really difficult to polish later. And then afterwards I apply flux to it, and that cleans the area where I plan to apply the solder to. Because solder, it really needs to be clean, the area does, otherwise the solder is just not going to flow at all. And the last thing you want is to risk melting the piece while trying to solder. and being stuck there for like 5 minutes or so, just trying to get it to flow and it won't, then that means like the pieces is probably not clean enough. So I like to come in tiny pieces so that I can apply a little at a time if I need to, instead of one giant piece. And sometimes they also like to jump and run away as well. So I'm also getting my torch running. I use oxygen and propane, and I kind of just touch it a bit so that the flame can start getting the boric acid to dry up a bit. And then I apply it to the piece and start heating it up. And the reaction you see and why the flame is turning green is because that's a reaction from when you apply flame to boric acid and then denature alcohol. And so here I am just heating up my bale, and I heat it up first because I plan to pick up my solder with my bale, and then I'm going to apply the bale to the piece. But the tricky part about soldering is you have to make sure both pieces are at the same heat temperature. Otherwise, the solder is not going to flow. Or one of your pieces may be, and one of the pieces might melt, or the other piece won't this is not going to be hot enough. So there is this dance in a way of, I'm going to be really, it may be hard to tell, but I'm focusing more on the bigger leaf, just because this is going to be a larger metal. I have to make sure I have to heat that up first, because it's not going to take very much to heat the bale up, because it's just a small area. So I'm just focusing on my heat control, and that's probably the hardest thing to learn about soldering, is the heat control. And otherwise you'll have a weird imbalance and it's not going to flow. And here it didn't quite make it, so I needed to readjust it, and because it did kind of flow, but it just wasn't enough, so I'm just doing it again to make sure my bale is on straight. As sometimes pieces like to move as you're trying to get it to join together. But yeah, the other tricky thing with soldering is trying to keep everything as still as possible. Like, you need to be able to hold something as perfectly still as possible for 5 minutes. Hopefully not 5 minutes, but it can take up to that much. Like, soldering doesn't take that long, but sometimes, like, you have to be willing to just keep an eye on it and just watch it. So I know you probably couldn't tell, but it just flowed just now. I was able to get the heat exactly where I needed to, and it flashed. When the solder flows, it flashes a bit. So I am preparing the piece to be cleaned. I put it in this solution called pickle. It's not actually pickle. It's just a type of different acid solution that's meant to clean off all the boric acid. And I'm going to be using copper tweezers specifically because if I use steel of any kind, it's just going to contaminate my solution, and then it's just not going to clean very well. And then I just remove it, and then I am ready to continue on working on the piece. So now what I'm doing is I'm creating all the veins, and this is really what's going to make my pendant stand out, because I like to have things more three-dimensional instead of just having it cut in or just cut out. I have to make all the veins by hand, because otherwise I won't have them as three-dimensional as I would like. So, but I'm just going to do the first large 3, and then I'll add all the small little veins and the areas afterward they're soldered, because that way I don't have to worry about all of them moving when I start doing the soldering process. So I'm prepping this piece once again for soldering, and I'm going to put the wire on first instead of after I heat it up, because this way it will kind of just like freeze them onto the pendant a bit right before I solder them and keep them in place. Because I made this pendant once before, but I would put the wires on after I heat the pendant, and then they kept moving and I had to keep adjusting, so that was annoying and very tedious. So I at least put them on first, and then that way they can just stay in place. So the wire I'm currently using is 18 yellow wire, and I particularly picked that out because I wanted the yellow gold to stand out more against the silver leaf. So what I'm using is 18 yellow easy solder, and that way it's going to flow a little easier. I mean, obviously, but just because the wires are so small, and they'll be able to attach really well to the leaf. And that way, and also too, what's nice is I did put some extra solder so that way when I start applying all the smaller veins, they'll be able to have solder already for them to bond to later. It'll just help that little extra work. So this way I don't have to apply as much solder as I normally would have. So over here, this is when the bale actually moved a bit and turned cockeyed on me. So as you can see, sometimes like if the solder melts again, then the piece will move. So, but I figured, well, I'm just gonna have to clean it and then redo that bale once more. But for now, I'm gonna start working on the rest of the gold veins, and then that way I can get that shaped the way I want to. And I'm just rinsing off the water right here. And then that way I can get that ready right before I start soldering again. And this is the most tedious part of this pendant. And so they might look kind of thick now, but I plan to taper them once they're all soldered onto the leaf. But yeah, this part definitely took a very long time when I first made it. And what I'll be using is some of my cutting tools to start tapering the bottom of the veins, like really just make them really skinny, and then just let them just get a little bit larger towards the top of the leaf. I wanted to make it look as organic as possible, which is why I do every single one individually by hand, and that way it can just look a little bit, well, like I said, more organic. So I'm prepping the piece once again for soldering, and so I have it on this brass plate this time, because at the time I was hoping it would keep the bale from shifting on me, and that way I can just apply the gold wire and not have to worry about it. However, it was not a good idea like I thought. At first it could have worked, but I end up having to solder a lot more than I planned on, just because like there were some spots that were hollow underneath some of the veins that I had to keep adding solder, and then just make sure every piece didn't have any weird gaps in it. However, I soldered so much that the leaf actually fused to the brass plate. So after that happened, and then part of the leaf actually like fused like way too much to the brass plate, so I had to just cut it all out and grind the back of it off before I could like fix it. So that way, and then I could get the silver back and then just start continuing on, and then I resoldered the bale back on later. And here I'm using a cutter tool to remove all the sharp edges from the gold wire, and this way they're not going to be poking out or anything. They're just going to stop where the silver will stop. So what I should have done was I should have soldered the bale at the end. I just figured the gold would have, it would melt sooner than the bale would, but I should have just done that the last thing, because that actually wasn't too bad. So what I'm currently now is I'm using a cutter that I actually use for stone setting, but I'm using it for this leaf so that I can taper the veins on. And then that way they can start to look more like how an autumn maple leaf normally would. So what I'm currently using right now is a spider wheel, and it's given a sanded finish, and that way I can have a nice contrast between the gold and the silver, because what I do afterwards is I polish just the gold veins, and then polish does leave some residue on it, so I clean it off by putting it into my ultrasonic, and it just cleans it right off. I really like how this necklace came out, and I especially like how organic it looks, and all the gold veins just add so much more dimension to the pendant. And this part is kind of challenging for me, because I had to really work hard trying to keep it not symmetrical, and especially making sure I was able to mimic nature. And I think I was able to just pull it off with this piece. And another nice thing about this pendant is you can wear it with warmer colors and cooler colors. And it's also a pendant that can be worn all year long. It doesn't have to be fall. And if everyone's made it to the end, thank you everybody for watching. Most of my work takes about a whole day to a week, so it's a little bit tricky to try to condense it all to 20 minutes. And I hope everyone can appreciate what I've done.